The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, welcome. Good to have you with us. I'm Bill Martinez, and our next guest is a Chilean-German lawyer. He's a master in investments, commerce, and arbitration, a master of arts, and doctor of philosophy from the University of Heidelberg. You know, there's a growing number of young Americans who believe that socialism is a good social and economic system. Well, according to a 2019 Gallup poll, 68% of baby boomers had a positive view of capitalism, while 32% had a positive view of socialism. This Chilean-German lawyer, international lecturer, and author talks about this from his new book, The Street Economist, 15 Economic Lessons Everyone Should Know. So whether you're a boomer or you're aging and, depending on, regardless of what demographic you fall into, he argues that many damaging policies have bled into society and threaten to undo the gains provided by the free market economy worldwide. Axel Kaiser desires to create more street economists and to make knowledge of economics more accessible to the common person to protect the free market values that bring prosperity to society. Axel, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Oh, thank you very much for this invitation.
Well, it's great to have you back. We've had you on the radio show, this time on the TV show. Your book, The Street Economist, 15 Economic Lessons Every Citizen Should Know. Why did you have to write this book?
Well, I had to write it because it was very obvious to me that most people don't know anything about economics. I'm referring to basic economic principles. For instance, what prices are, why free trade is beneficial, what is capital, what determines your income, and things like that. So I did a lot of work in reading over the years the most complex and sophisticated economic texts. And then I decided to write this very accessible book. It's only 120 pages, no footnotes, no graphs, no math. And it has become a best-selling book in different countries, and it's being translated already to 6 languages, and it's probably going to be published also in Russia and other countries. So it was obvious to me that economic ignorance was one of the reasons why, especially among young people, socialism is gaining a lot of traction. So that's why I wrote it.
Well, it's purposefully commonsensical, isn't it?
It is commonsensical, but things have to be explained anyways, because the socialist narrative is extremely attractive, and it's very powerful in terms of, we will help the people who are at the lowest of or at the bottom of society. It's the wealthy and the powerful against the rest, and all of these things, the 1% against the masses, are extremely persuasive because they feel good, and they give you, especially as a young person, they give you a sense of epic and meaning. And so you have this purpose in life to fight against exploitation and against abusive institutions and so on and so forth. But of course, this is purely emotional. Marxism was a religion after all. It wasn't really science as Marx pretended it to be. And narratives are often more powerful than facts. And so I tried to write this book so that it could become a narrative, but as well grounded on facts. So I offered several arguments that destroy socialism in only a few pages with very simple examples. Right. So that's one of the main aims of this book. We have to bring people back to rationality.
Well, you're exactly spot on here, Axel, because there's no doubt the human mind responds to the story. You put out a nice enough narrative, you make it sound good, and it appeals to the emotional side of our humanity. And next thing you know, hook, line, and sinker, we've bought into it. And it takes academics, it takes common sense people like yourself, parents, grandparents, especially grandparents. I can tell you, in the Hispanic culture, our grandmother, if we said something stupid, our grandmother would kind of look at us first. And then if we didn't wise up, then she'd remove her chancla, her house slipper, and throw it at us. And that was usually the signal that, we had to get rid of that stinking thinking and take it out of the house because it wasn't going to fly around her. Right.
Yeah, I mean that's the good thing about having families where you can profit from the wisdom of the elderly people, right? I mean, I learned a lot from my grandmother and my grandfather as well. They had more common sense than people nowadays, and that's probably because they had to live tough lives. I mean, it wasn't easy to grow up in the 20s and then the 30s and 40s. You had world wars and you didn't have all the comfort that you have now. And I think that's partly the reason why new generations have forgotten the lessons of the 20th century. And
Right.
also no one teaches this at school or the university.
Isn't that amazing? Something like this is not taught. And, you touch on something that's so important here is the previous generation, how smart they were. Here we were, with all this scholastic achievement and availability and academia and everything, thinking we're all that in a bag of chips. And in the process of thinking we're so smart, we end up siloing ourselves. And as Jordan Peterson would describe, that we end up rendering ourselves stupid. And so our grandparents, we come home, or maybe it's a family reunion, or we come home for holiday, for Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner, and they're around the table and they're looking at us like, what planet did you come from?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, as I said, they had to work hard for what they achieved and for everything they had. And we are more of a spoiled generation. We profited from the US winning the Cold War and then the huge economic growth that we had in Western Europe after the Second World War, and because someone else did their job for us.
Yes.
And I think we don't have a connection with reality, and many of these economic policies or public policies that have been put in place, even in the United States, like student loans, for instance, have made it harder for people to get in touch with reality. And also it has provided a lot of funding for stupid ideologies, like this whole postmodern deconstruction thing that you are seeing with the woke movement, for instance.
Right, exactly.
And it started at universities. And so I mean, it's the same fighting for the free market, is fighting for individual freedom, it's fighting for human dignity, it's fighting for the chance for you to stand on your own feet and to, take advantage of opportunities and not be, someone who depends on the government and in the end, becomes like a parasite.
Yeah.
And so all of this goes together with the fight for preserving our intellectual heritage and fighting wokeism, which is also extremely dangerous, and it's anti-capitalist as well. So this is my contribution in terms of economics. And it has been hugely successful with young people. That means there was a need for people to read something like this, and no one is going to read Paul Samuelson's Introduction to Economics. It's a huge book, full of wrong ideas, by the way. But also, it's very technical, so people don't want to read that. People want to read something short that is accessible and that is truth.
Yes,
and so I think has been the key to the success of the book.
Yeah, that's why these young kids are eating it up, Axel. Thank God for your contribution, because the fact of the matter is when government comes in, they end up serving as a crutch, and oftentimes it's not even that they get involved to really help kids as much as it is there's always some strings attached. It's like, okay, I'll give you tuition forgiveness, but in exchange, you got to give me your vote, right? Well, that in itself should tell you right off the bat, that's not a good deal.
Yeah, it's bribing people with their own money, because in the end, you have to pay it via taxation or inflation or debt, which are deferred taxes anyways. And the problem is that when you get rid of the price system, because you have this incentive structure where the government tells you, okay, you can study whatever, cultural studies at some university, and then you are going to have it paid by the university, by the government, because they're going to give you the student loan. And at some point, maybe you will pay it back in the future. But the problem with that is that it not only is unfair that people are funding people that don't go to university are funding people who went to university, but also it creates the wrong signal, because if you had to pay for yourself, you would probably not study cultural studies, which is useless and it's indoctrination anyways.
Right.
You would study probably, engineering or something like that, where for a fact that you invested that amount of money, and then you expect to make a profit out of it once you have your degree,
right,
out of the education you got. So
yeah, you would hope there'd be a job at the other end of the studies, right?
Exactly, but the problem is when you don't have to pay, you don't have the incentive right away to go to university and study the most productive career, and this helps all of these professors who are activists, who are not really after teaching people, but they want to indoctrinate them.
Exactly.
But they have jobs now, and they can publish their journals full of garbage and all of that because of student loans in the end, because all this money is flowing, and universities can raise tuitions because the government is stepping in order to cover for the cost. So it's extremely inefficient. You have, I think it's over $1 trillion debt in terms of, the student loans.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And the talk is now that we are going to forgive the debt. We are going to tell people that they are not going to pay for the debt. So for the debt, and I can understand frustrated young people who went to university and don't get good jobs, and so they say, okay, they cheated on me because they told me that I was going to be fine after I had a degree, and it's not the case.
Exactly.
I'm getting hamburgers at the McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the government involvement in education is a very good example of how you end up creating a huge mess in the name of good intentions. It's everything is wrong with government getting involved.
I'm not even sure good intentions is part of the part of it, to be honest with you. And I don't mean to sound so cynical. Axel Kaiser is our guest. His book, The Street Economist, 15 Economic Lessons Every Citizen Should Know. Axel, these young kids that, as you say, are being indoctrinated. But, think about this for just a moment. I think maybe the government has a guilty conscience because the cost of tuition has continued to accelerate in such a way that it leads me to believe that the system's rigged. I mean, look what's happened to college tuition in the last 10 years, how it has grown dramatically. And what's the difference? I mean, have the professors suddenly become, 10 times, 100 times more intelligent? Are there books that much more, just so much more valuable, when all it is, maybe they altered one chapter of the book, but yet, we're paying, 10 plus times more for our tuition than we did previously.
Well, I would even argue that the opposite is the case. I think the quality of education is going down. You have more and more people with degrees that are not productive at all, and have costed like billions of dollars to the taxpayers. And also, the whole thing is completely, I would say, rigged, because universities are profiting a lot. Politicians who promise these things to young people, they get their votes, and also in the end, universities are profiting as well because they are expanding, and it's a booming business. And there is a very interesting chart graph that was published by the Institute of American Enterprise, or American Enterprise Institute. And they show that all the areas in the United States where the government is involved, prices have gone up dramatically, much more than inflation. Much more than inflation, like healthcare, everything that has to do with social services and, of course, education and things like that.
Right.
But all of the other items, prices have gone down. Technology, and even things like in not healthcare, but like plastic surgeries and things like that are not covered by insurance, and where the government doesn't get involved, they have gone, the prices have gone down. So it's very obvious that government involvement is making all of these things more expensive, and by a large, I mean, by much more than the inflation, which, by the way, is also created by the government.
Right, of course.
Yeah. So I think it should be addressed by the political class in the United States and everywhere. But the United States it's a disastrous case of making things unaffordable to people, such as higher education. And actually, there are many Americans now going to study in Germany and other universities in Europe because they are much cheaper. And really, in the United States, yes, you have the best universities in the world, but most universities are not so good. So you have top 20 universities and the rest are not so good. You have better universities in Germany. And so people say, why will I pay, I don't know, $100,000, $80,000, whatever it is, in the United States if I can go and study almost for free in Europe? And I'm not advocating for free education, but I'm saying the system in the United States is the worst possible that you can have, because exactly. And so, I mean, something has to be done about this. It's a huge problem, and at some point, people are going to start defaulting on their debt. And so, it's not it's not a mystery why younger generations are endorsing socialism more and more, because they are seeing it increasingly difficult to have a decent quality of life, even after they got a degree, with the exception of degrees in engineering and things like that, which are very useful still. But many of them are not getting those degrees because they are not really being informed very well. They don't know. They believe if I go to whatever to study history at some state university or even Berkeley or whatever, I will be doing fine. Not necessarily.
No, that's right. Well, exactly. And in a sense, as you say, the system appears to be rigged, and what is being perpetrated here, in a sense, is kind of a modern form of indentured servitude. How do these kids get out of this incredible tuition debt, Axel? And then as if that's not bad enough, let's throw inflation into the mix. I mean, you may have seen a light at the end of the tunnel and going, I can see a light at the end of the tunnel, but because of inflation, it's not a light to get you out. It's a train coming to hit you right square on.
Yes, my guess is that the student loan debt, it's going to end up in a big disaster,
right?
Because I don't think they're going to be able to pay back this debt, a large percentage of the students. And the pressure on the political class to do something about this is rising.
You're asking the wrong people to fix it. They're the ones that messed it up. That's like asking them to do brain surgery on themselves. They don't have the capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I think is going to happen at some point is there is going to be a haircut. They're going to say, okay, don't pay the whole amount, just pay 30% or 40%, something like that, because it's impossible for them to pay it back for the students. Right. Not with an economy that is not working very well, which is the case of the United States, because this is the other part of the problem. You are not having high economic growth rates like you used to have, so you are not creating a lot of opportunities for young people to have well-paid jobs. And so this is going to put extra pressure on a political class to do something about these millions of students, because they are millions, and also they can vote. So
exactly. Well, and they need to vote smart, because their vote is what has the current regime in play right now, and they are controlling their future. As you say in lesson 1, to work is to live. That is, God's mandate to man. Be fruitful, multiply. we know by experience we're happiest when we're working, when we have a job and we're providing for our family. Unfortunately, when you have all these people coming out of college and all the jobs that should have been there for them have been jettisoned overseas, or government has gotten in the way, and they've created more problems and a disaster. And so it's like they make these moves, Axel, without even thinking and considering the causal relationship. It's like, okay, what's in the pipeline here? These kids that are in college that are going to be graduating in the next 2 years that are going to want jobs, what jobs are available to them? And instead of jettisoning those jobs or interfering with by regulations to make it that much more difficult for these kids to get a job.
Yes, absolutely. And now you have all this new wave of people trying to impose more taxes on the rich, on the wealthy. I recently saw a YouTube video by this economist who was a Secretary of Labor to Clinton, Robert Reich. I think he was to Clinton. Well, he was saying that the only thing that we can do is to introduce a wealth tax, and in the United States, because wealth inequality has increased so much, and so we have to do something about it. And there's, I mean, if you take a look at this video, it's very good production, but it's full of fallacies, right?
Yeah, right.
So what is going on right now is that they're doubling down on the failed economic policies that led to this whole mess.
Exactly.
So the same people who advocated for the student loan scheme, which has degenerated into a massive problem, are the people saying we have to tax the rich more, that government has to intervene even more and has to redistribute more wealth, and the government has to be even bigger and has to print money, and they have MMT and all these theories. And if they go on like this, they're going to destroy the whole country in the United States. If we don't do anything about it, then what is going to happen to the West? I mean, Europe is a museum. In Europe, there is no economic growth, with the exception of a few small countries. But most of the countries, Germany is in recession. Europe is completely sclerotic due to the welfare state that they have created. They are every country almost has 20% youth unemployment rate in Europe. Many countries. So. What about Japan? Japan has 260% of GDP. It's a nursing home. Japanese are dying out. They have huge problems. China is also a problem. They have huge amounts of debt. They have a real estate sector that is imploding. And so growth is half of what it used to be. And then you have in India might be offer some hope, but it's not enough. So what are we going to do if the United States is not capable of fixing these problems? And that is maybe the major problem for the US. It's going to bring down the whole world,
Right. Exactly. We don't have to worry about having a war with China. We're going to implode on our own policies. That's what's happening. And and you mentioned China. China is such a mess. I mean, they're huffing, puffing, but there's not a whole lot of bluster. Or at least support for the bluster that they're puffing out there, because just like you said, economically, they're very anemic. They got lots of problems. The one-child policy, you've got a lot of single men with no prospect of women. I don't know what they're going to do, because, you're talking millions of men without women, unless somehow they make it the rule of law that women can be, they can marry multiples of men to keep them satisfied. Heaven help them, because as you know, part of what makes the world go round is you gotta have romance. And if you squash romance, you start getting a lot of angry men, and angry men lead you to war real quick.
Yeah, they lead you to war, to social instability. There is a reason why nature has created an almost 50-50 divide between men and women in every society. It's not exactly 50-50, but it's almost half and half.
Exactly.
And the Chinese have destroyed this with their one-child policy, and now they're facing also economic consequences that could be devastating, because they have a shrinking population, and they need young people to keep on working in the factories and everywhere.
And who's going to take care of the parents? Because the traditional culture is the oldest takes care of mom and dad as they're heading into their next stage of life, right?
And that's a big problem because these elderly people now in China don't have any kids, and many of them, or only one or so. And so this is a big problem. Also in Europe, I would say Europe has the advantage that it is more developed and so on. But if you take a look at the social security in Europe, it's broke everywhere. I mean, Germany, France, even the Nordic countries, the system is completely unsustainable. And now they're trying to make some changes. And I can tell this because Chile was the first country in the world to privatize social security. And we have private capitalization accounts where you save part of your own money, and then it's invested. And then when you retire, you get the money you save. But it's not the pay-as-you-go system where younger people have to pay for retired people. Yeah. That doesn't work now with these demographics. And it's also unfair, I would argue.
Well, it becomes a Ponzi scheme like here in America.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a Ponzi scheme. And you have the same problem. Social security is a huge problem in the United States. I know for a fact that at some point, George Bush, the second, Junior, was thinking about promoting a Chilean-style social security system, but then 9/11 came. Yeah. And all of that was forgotten.
Well, when he brought it up, Axel, they all but tarred and feathered him. Yeah, they didn't. It was the wrong gospel, wrong church. I mean, he just and again, yes, you're exactly right. 9/11 came, and all of a sudden, instead of dealing with some social issues, then he became a wartime president. Everything got altered.
Exactly. No, and so the problem continues to get worse, I would say. And at some point, you might have a currency crisis if you have so much debt and you don't address these issues. It's not like the United States can abuse the dollar status forever because it's the reserve currency of the world. Cannot work forever, and we will live through a crisis in the next 20 or 30 years. If they, or even before, even earlier, I don't know, but it will come. And you already have some governments dumping US dollar denominated assets because they are starting to worry that the United States is never going to pay back the debt.
Exactly. Well, we hit 33 trillion this past week, Axel. Yeah. 33 trillion. Our debt service, just the loan payment, the interest payment alone is starting to mirror our defense budget. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, I know it's terrible, and it's getting worse by the minute. So I think it's important that people understand basic economics. And this first lesson I put to work is to live. It's, I think, the core of everything, because we have forgotten in the West, after so many decades of prosperity, that in order to live, you need resources.
Exactly.
You have to somehow create these resources and get them, and you can do it by working yourself or by living at the expense of someone else who is working.
Right.
And this is the welfare state in the end is that. And in the United States, if you take a look at the federal budget, 2/3 is for entitlements and what we call social rights. Right. And so it's a lot of people. You have too many people living at the expense of everyone else. Right. And that makes the system unsustainable. And so we have to remember that everyone has to be responsible for his own destiny.
Exactly.
And this was Jefferson's philosophy. This was the philosophy, that was at the heart of the Declaration of Independence. And
exactly.
And the Constitution is self-reliance.
Right.
It's not the welfare state and people, being happy because other groups of society are being taxed in order to fund their needs. That's why
the thing is, it's ridiculous because their needs, I mean, it's small end needs. It's not anything ambitious, because when you're relying on somebody else, it's unsustainable. To your point, there's no way, because there's never enough. You see, that whole category that you talked about, that entitlement category, that is the biggest vote getting scam ever. You can attach every one of those entitlements to a group of votes.
Yeah, I like one of Thomas Sowell's quotes where he says that the first lesson of economics is that resources are scarce and that needs are infinite.
Yes.
But the first lesson of politics is to ignore the first lesson of economics. So, so I think that this line sums it up very well, because in the end, politicians, if we really think about it, in a democracy, have also the wrong incentives because they want to get reelected, and so they offer
number one job. They tell when people get elected, they think they go in, they're going to represent their constituency. They've just come off the campaign trail, and then they go in. The freshman class goes in, and they get their orientation. And the first thing they tell them at orientation, your number one job, and they go, well, they think it's to take care of their constituents. They go, no. Your number one job is to get reelected.
And that's a big problem, because in the end, if you, only worry about getting reelected, and because you are not really, you don't have the interest of the nation in mind first.
Yes.
And when you have a huge economic crisis, it will be a crisis of the democratic system as well. Because it's democracy and the politicians who created the problem. And we have seen so many times in history, well, the most dramatic example is Germany with the Nazis. I mean, if it had not been for the huge crisis that, we had in the late 1920s, and before that, the hyperinflation, then the Nazis would have never come to power. And Weimar was a democracy. It wasn't a perfect democracy, but it was a democratic experiment. It was working. And then at some point, you had hyperinflation, excessive debt because of reparations, but also because of a lot of spending by the Weimar Republic government.
Right.
And then you had the crash of 1929. And that's when the Nazis went from 2-3% of the popular vote to over 40%. Yeah. And so these are lessons of history that we have to learn, not because it's going to repeat itself in the same way, but because they offer us insight to the problems we have nowadays and what could happen eventually if we don't take care of them.
Exactly.
And I fear that in the United States, if you have a big crisis, like it could happen if you have a currency crisis, that the political system would probably collapse, or it would have serious challenges, would have to face serious challenges. You would have masses of people that would be very angry and voting maybe for someone who no one can imagine, a very radical, politician that would
kind of like the president we have now. We can't imagine that's kind of what happened.
Worse.
In a sense, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, we can't imagine worse. This is about the worst as it's been. I mean, he has replaced Jimmy Carter in terms of the economic disaster that he has created on the American people. I mean, it's just been unconscionable. But, like you say, Axel, is that, the government, these are the very people that have created this problem, and then they want to tell everybody that they're the ones to fix it.
Yeah, and that's the big lie, and that's why we have to think of alternatives. I mean, are Republicans going to do something about this or not? The problem is, maybe if you want to do something serious about the debt, there are lots of people who are getting transfer from the government, or benefits, social benefits from the government, will not vote for you. And that means that you are in a competition with the Democrats in order to offer more and more, so people can, will put you in charge. So I think it's very hard, because the dynamic doesn't allow for major corrections unless you have a bipartisan agreement that you have to do something about it, because in the end, the survival of the democratic system is at stake, or might be at stake, right? You have a very big crisis. So that's the only way out I can see for this. But I don't see Trump or Ron DeSantis or Gavin Newsom if he was going to be the next president, because there's a lot of pressure on Biden so that he doesn't run again. But they're not going to do a lot about it. Of course, Ron DeSantis or Trump would be much better. There is no question about it.
Right.
But I don't think if they would have enough muscle to make the necessary changes that the United States needs in order to create prosperity again.
Exactly. Well, he look at how much resistance he got in the 4 years of his presidency. And even with that, what he was able to accomplish was astounding. But I look at it just a simple case like COVID. I mean, he exercised some common sense, said, look, this thing's coming, coming via Europe. We need to close the borders. We need to close the West and the East. And they argued with them, and they finally relented, allowing the close airports to, coming in from the East, but they left the West wide open. And I think had he had his way, everything would have been shut down so we could be better protected. But, this was, again, the resistance of the Democratic Party and Dr. Fauci and those that were promoting that narrative. And they put us at risk.
Yes, unfortunately, they care more about being anti-Trump or anti-right or whatever than being pro, public health. And so, or anything else that it benefits society. I mean, if Trump says whatever he says, they're going to go against it.
But it goes back to what you said earlier. See, if their mindset isn't for that which is going to serve the people, then, that isn't part of the equation. It's about them being serviced, right? About them getting reelected, them covering their political rear ends. And so here we go. And now, 3 years down the road, we're still trying to figure out what the truth is, what it isn't. And if somebody says something against their perception, then you get canceled. I mean, even like right now, I'm at risk because there's some platforms, we can't even talk about the C word. If you talk about the C word, they won't allow this show to be aired on their platform. So I'm dodging a little bit of a tight wire. I will say that. So I want to disconnect from that point, because I think we've made a good enough point as it is. In lesson 2, you kind of touched on this. We said lesson 1 was to work is to live, and you kind of touched on 2, and I want you to unfold that a little bit more. There are only 2 ways to make a living.
There are only 2 ways to make a living, and that's out of your own income and effort, and when you go to work and you produce something, then you have an income, or someone else's. And the only way you can get someone else's money is by, having them give it to you as a donation, let's say, or by stealing the money from them. And that's what government does. I mean, if you get some subsidy by the government or some social benefit, well, the government is taxing someone else in order to pay for your benefit. So that means government is taking away by force the fruits of the labor of someone in order to cover for your expense. And so it doesn't matter if you are the one who, from this economic point of view, if you are the one who is going to your neighbor with a gun and point the gun at his head and say, let's give me half of your income because I need it to pay for my bills, or the government does it. It's the same thing. It's the same mechanism. In the end, you are extracting wealth that was created by someone else, and you are spending it without giving anything in return. So that's a parasitic society. And the problem when you develop this political economy of redistribution is that you end up killing the incentives for people to produce more, but you create lots of incentives for people to live from someone else. So this very basic idea, no one can refute. And I've been in debates with socialists all of my life, and no one could ever tell me why was it immoral for someone to go to the neighbor with the gun pointed at his head and take part of their income, but it is moral if the government does it. So I've won every debate with this argument. It's immoral. Redistribution, it's immoral. I understand that there might be some utility and some practical need of redistributing something. But we have to always keep in mind that you are taking money away from people who work for it.
Right.
And so
Exactly. Mhm.
you
Well, and
might,
this is like you say, the government is doing this as well. They're stealing, and redistributing wealth and to buy votes, and then to further rig the system, they're allowing those people who benefit from stolen goods to vote again. Right?
and so, yeah, and so this makes things even worse, because if I go to my neighbor with a revolver or whatever, and I tell him, and I rob him of 30% of his income, at least I'm being very efficient. But the problem is, when the government gets in the middle, a large part of what they are stealing in order to supposedly benefit other people, it's going to be spent in ways that only benefit the politicians, or is going to be stalled. In many countries, we have huge levels of corruption, runaway corruption. In Latin America, we have, in Europe, even in many countries, you have a lot of corruption. And in the United States, you also have corruption. So it's not like every cent that the government is taking from someone who's paying taxes is being spent properly. Most of the money is not being spent properly. Most of the money is being spent in order to buy votes. Most of the money is flowing to interest groups, unions, and other groups. And most of the money is benefiting the interest of the politicians.
Exactly.
That's how it works, because this is a point we have to remember. It's not like politicians are angels. But once you go into government, you forget about pursuing your own interest, and you only think about the common good and things like that. This is nonsense. I mean, if you really think about it, people believe that the consumers, workers, the employers, all of them pursue their own interest. But as soon as you become a politician and you're in government, you don't pursue your interest anymore. You are sort of this very generous creature falling from the heavens, who is going to take care of everyone. This is nonsense. Yeah. This is why Milton Friedman was so much against government, or a large or big government, because he understood a very basic idea, that is that politicians and bureaucrats pursue their own interest.
Well, we're human beings. We're not perfect. And like you said, we're not angels. And you see all that money there, and the model has already been well established. Axel, before you even got there, you've got politicians that are, like today, we're dealing with a politician who just got indicted, for bribery. And we'll see how that plays out, because this isn't the first time that he's been indicted. So, but it's the natural course of things. I think it's a real simple deal. Like you say, these politicians who go in supposedly to serve, and then when they retire, and they're making 170, maybe 180,000 a year, and they retire and they're worth now $33 million or whatever, some incredible amount of money. Well, how do you do that on $170,000 a year salary?
No, I think in many cases, at least in the United States, these politicians have traded favors, right? I mean, they in the end work for interest groups, different interest groups, large corporations, Wall Street, unions, whatever. And then they get juicy amounts paid for, doing some advising here and there, for speaking here and there. I mean, you just have to take a look at the Clinton Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
It's unbelievable. So they take advantage of that. If you take a look at Obama is very rich. Is a rich person. They were not rich before.
Yeah. So see, what you're touching on there, is something I've been touching on, more than touching on, we've been talking about quite repeatedly, is that nobody's talking about Barack Obama, but you have Joe Biden, you got Hillary Clinton, you got John Kerry, all, trading favors based on their position in government. And you're going to tell me that some of that money didn't go up to the really big guy? It's amazing that nobody wants to say anything. I think it's near impossible to think that Barack Obama did not participate in those quid pro quos.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any evidence, but you can take a look at his lifestyle right now, and Martha's Vineyard, and here and there, and friends with Richard Branson and so on. I mean, he's like a Hollywood star, and of course, this is explained by the fact that he was the president. And now I'm not saying that he couldn't speak somewhere and charge $200,000 for a speech. That's his right to do. Mm-hmm. But what we do know for a fact is that you have a lot of corruption in Washington going on, and it's benefiting interest groups everywhere. I mean, the politicians are working for them, and we do know that it's not a coincidence that you have so many lobbyists living in Washington. I mean, there is a reason for that,
right?
And I mean that they're doing their job, and I'm not arguing that they shouldn't do it, but politicians shouldn't serve interest groups. They should serve the people.
Exactly.
And they are not doing that.
Yeah.
And they are playing a game that is going to end up disastrously, because they pretend like the money they can spend has no limit. They can spend money forever.
Right.
And every problem they have, they go and throw money at it, and they print more money to pay for everything. And then, of course, that's going to be paid for by the middle class and by the average American, because you have to pay it through inflation or taxation. There is no other way.
Right.
And this is a disaster. And these are the things that no one is teaching at universities or at schools. No one.
But the thing is, though, Axel, see, the kids come out and they realize that the system's rigged, and they get frustrated because they find out real quick that it's not a level playing field. It's like, like with, what's happening with this senator. He unleveled the playing field, and he picked his own winners to serve his own interest. And this is time and again what's going on, whether we're talking about, a simple thing like cannabis. How many politicians are tied to, a select number? I can tell you in Florida, there's a select number of growers of cannabis that are allowed, but their money is going to a specific number of politicians that give them cover. And nobody else can come in and grow cannabis here in Florida without, going to jail or paying a serious fine.
Well, that's a classic example of corruption in a way, because of course, you're benefiting your friends at the expense of everyone else. You are blocking competition so that they can make a huge profit. And so these are ways that politicians really trade favors, right?
Exactly.
It's not that you have to be in bed with Pablo Escobar. It's just you use legislation, you use your influence, your power in order to trade these favors. And provide these opportunities for certain groups of people that will support you and will give you money in return. And so, as I said, the problem is the government. It's too big. It has too much power. And the United States is not really the country of the free anymore, at least not as it used to be in the past. Before the welfare state and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and all of this progressive movement, the government started to grow and grow and grow, and it never stopped. Like Reagan tried to do something about it, but in the end, it wasn't very successful, because after him, it continued to grow. And even, I think, in his second term, the problem of public spending was even worse. But the thing in the end is that if Americans don't embrace again the free market tradition that made the country the greatest country in the history of the world, and the ideas of individual liberty, they're going to end up in a basket country, in a nation that is ruined by collectivist and socialist and progressive policies. And that would be awful to observe and awful to live. Because
and the frustrating thing, Axel, we got about 2 minutes left here, and I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm going to let you summarize and take us to conclusion. But the frustrating thing about all this is when you look at the early founding of this country, the era when Tocqueville came here and observed what was going on in this country, he saw what humanity and the dynamism and free markets and people being able to do and express themselves through their labor and have a level playing field and a fair chance to win. Unfortunately, the scales have been rigged, and it's frustrating people. But if we can square that away, I'll tell you, our GDP numbers, the satisfaction and happiness of the citizenry of America. And I believe that we'd have a great impact on the world for that matter. It wouldn't be just America, it'd be the world, because they would see that America has come back, that they can do it. And if we can do it, they can do it, right? A minute left. I'll let you summarize and take us home. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I would invite everyone to read the Street Economist, to give it to their children, to the friends of their children, to buy it. It's going to change their minds. It's a book that has become a best-selling book in different countries, and it has made a lot of a big difference in terms of their politics. So of the readers, yeah. So I would encourage people to buy it and to read it.
Well, actually, I cannot thank you enough. In the words of Phil Gramm, the Economist author, former chair of the Senate Banking Committee and former vice chair of UBS Investment, he says, if you want to understand the world you live in and how it works, you don't have 5 years to get a PhD in economics. I suggest you read Axel Kaiser's The Street Economist. Dr. Kaiser explains economics the way my mama did. This short, simple book tells you everything you need to know to understand the world you live in and how to make it better. Axel, again, thank you so much for being with us. Godspeed, my friend. You take care.
Thank you very much, Bill. See you next time.
You got it. Our thanks to Axel Kaiser for being with us today. For more information, to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and to save our country, check it out, BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Thank you so much for being with us. Go be blessed and enjoy your day.